This is Thermopylae. It doesn't look like much, does it? No bottomless pit, no towering narrow cliffs, just a road, a plain, and the quiet weight of history. For 2,500 years, this strip of land has been buried, not just by silt and earth, but by myth. We have been told a story of 300 men against 1,000,000, a story of freedom against tyranny, of demigods in leather speedos fighting a horde of monsters. The story we know is a lie, a brilliant, necessary lie perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. The reality of what happened here in 480 BC is far more complex, more political, and infinitely more brutal than any Hollywood blockbuster could ever portray. This is the story of what really happened at the Hot Gates. It's a story not just of 300 Spartans, but of 7,000 Greeks. It's a story not of monsters, but of a clash between the two most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. And it's a story that begins not with a king's defiant kick, but with a bridge of boats, an act of hubris that would set the world on fire.
Spanning 3 continents, the Achaemenid Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, undertaking monumental engineering projects.
The enemy was not a 9-foot-tall gold-plated giant. The enemy was Xerxes, the great king, ruler of the Achaemenid Empire. He was not a god, but he commanded resources that seemed supernatural. His father, Darius, had been humiliated a decade earlier at a place called Marathon. Xerxes would not make the same mistake. His was not a mere army. It was an intercontinental migration. To prepare, he didn't just march, he re-engineered the planet. He ordered a canal dug through the Mount Athos Peninsula, a 1.5-mile-long channel wide enough for 2 warships just to avoid a stormy cape that had wrecked his father's fleet. It took 3 years. Then he came to the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe. He commanded his engineers to build a bridge of boats, a floating road over 1 mile long. Herodotus, our primary, if dramatic source, tells us a storm destroyed the first bridge. In a fit of rage, Xerxes supposedly ordered the water to be whipped 300 times and had the engineers beheaded. It's likely propaganda, but it reveals how the Greeks saw him. A tyrant so arrogant he would literally lash the sea. The second bridge held. For 7 days and 7 nights, an unbroken river of men, horses, and wagons flowed from Asia into Europe.
While perhaps not millions, scholarly estimates suggest the Persian army was an unprecedented force.
But how many? The myth says millions. Herodotus claimed 1.7 million soldiers. Modern historians laugh at this number. The logistics of feeding and watering such a force would be impossible, even today. A more sober estimate, perhaps 150,000 to 250,000 men. But here is the brutal truth. In the context of ancient warfare, that number was 1 million. It was an avalanche, the largest army the world had ever seen. And it wasn't a rabble of slaves. The core of his force was the Anushia, the companions, known to the Greeks as the Immortals, a 10,000-man professional, elite, heavy infantry unit. The Persians were not monsters. They were a sophisticated, organized, multi-ethnic superpower, and in 480 BC, all of Greece, a fractious collection of tiny warring city-states, lay in their path. The Persian objective was simple, not just revenge, but submission.
Your strategy is madness. The path is vulnerable.
Silence. We hold the pass or Greece falls. There is no retreat.
Panic swept Greece. Some city-states, like Thebes, immediately Medized. They surrendered, offering the symbolic earth and water to Xerxes. But a small coalition, led by Athens and Sparta, vowed to resist. They were hopelessly outnumbered on land. Their only hope was to find a bottleneck, a place where Xerxes' numbers meant nothing. They found it at Thermopylae. The name means hot gates, named for the sulfur springs that bubbled nearby. Back then, The sea came right up to the mountains, leaving a path in some places only a few yards wide. It was a natural funnel, a choke point. But who would hold it? The allied Greek army was mustering, but it was slow. It was also the time of the sacred Olympic Games and the Spartan festival of Carnage, religious truces during which war was forbidden. This is where the myth of the 300 begins. The Spartan ephors, the ruling council, refused to send the full army. So King Leonidas, one of Sparta's two kings, took a different approach. He didn't assemble an army. He assembled a bodyguard. He gathered 300 men from the Hippes, the royal guard, but they weren't just any 300. He gathered 300 men from the Hippes, the royal guard, but they weren't just any 300, a sacrifice preordained. But here is the first part of the lie we are always told. They were not alone. Leonidas marched not with 300, but with a force of roughly 7,000 Greeks, 700 from Thespiae, 400 from Thebes, who were there as semi-hostages, as Thebes was suspected of treason, 1,000 from Phocis, and thousands more from other small cities. The 300 Spartans were the elite, armored corps, the tip of the spear, but they were part of a coalition. And they were not fighting in leather loincloths. That is a fantasy. The real Spartan was a 70-pound tank. He wore a bronze cuirass, chest plate, bronze greaves, shin guards, and a heavy vision-restricting Corinthian helmet. His primary weapon was the 9-foot dory, a long spear with an iron tip and a bronze butt spike. His shield, the aspis, was his most important weapon. 3 feet wide, made of wood and bronze, it weighed over 20 pounds. It wasn't just for defense. It was an offensive weapon. Locked together, shield overlapping shield, spears bristling over the top, the Greeks formed the phalanx. It was the most terrifying killing machine of its age. At Thermopylae, the phalanx didn't just stand on the path, it became the path. A wall of bronze, a wall of wood, a wall of flesh. But to understand why the 300 Spartans were so formidable and why we must be careful calling them heroes of freedom, we must look at the society that created them. The brutal truth of Sparta is not its battlefield prowess, but its entire civilization. Sparta was not a free state. It was a totalitarian, eugenicist military oligarchy built on the backs of a massive slave population. The Spartans themselves were a tiny minority, the homioi or equals. The vast majority of people in their land, Lacedaemon, were the Helots. The Helots were not slaves bought from a market. They were a conquered Greek people bound to the land who existed for one purpose, to feed their Spartan masters. The Helot to Spartan ratio was perhaps as high as 10-to-1. This entire system was designed to do one thing: free the male Spartan citizen from all forms of labor, farming, commerce, craft, so he could dedicate his entire life from birth to death to being a soldier. Why? To maintain brutal control over the Helot population. The Spartan wasn't just trained to fight Persians, he was trained first and foremost to kill Greeks. This training was the Agoge. At age 7, a Spartan boy was taken from his family and thrust into a state-run military barracks. He was kept barefoot, underfed, and encouraged to steal food. If he was caught, he was beaten, not for stealing, but for being caught. He was taught to endure pain, to speak in an infamously short or laconic way. He was taught that the state was his only family and the phalanx his only home. At its most extreme, this system produced the Krypteia, a secret police of young Spartans who, as a final test, were sent into the countryside to hunt and kill any Helot they found on the road at night, simply to terrorize the population. This is the hypocrisy at the heart of Thermopylae. Leonidas and his men were fighting for their freedom. the freedom of Sparta and Greece to exist independent of Persian rule. But the very freedom they had to go and fight was made possible by the most brutal system of human enslavement in the ancient world. They were not fighting for our modern idea of democracy or human rights. They were fighting for their right to remain masters of their own house.
Attack! Shield wall! Forward! Die!
For 2 days, the hot gates became a meat grinder. Xerxes, sitting on a throne carved into the hillside, watched in disbelief. He first sent in the Medes, his standard troops. They charged the narrow pass and shattered against the Greek phalanx. The Greeks' spears were longer, their armor was heavier, their shields were stronger, and they were fighting on home turf in a formation designed for this exact moment. Herodotus says the Spartans feigned retreats, a complex maneuver called the anachoresis, tricking the Persians into breaking rank and charging, only to turn and reform the phalanx, slaughtering them in the chaos. The sound must have been unimaginable. Not the clean shing of swords, but the dull, wet thump of a spearhead punching through a leather tunic, the screech of bronze on bronze, the crack of a skull under a shield's rim. The Spartans at the front would have been covered head to toe in blood and viscera. The othismos, the push, would begin. It wasn't a battle of duels. It was a scrum, a human bulldozer match, where the back ranks literally pushed the front ranks forward, driving their spears and shields into the enemy, trampling the dead and dying underfoot. Xerxes was furious. On the second day, he sent in the best he had, the Immortals. He offered a vast reward for the capture of Leonidas. The Immortals were elite, but they were still light infantry compared to the Greek hoplites. Their shorter spears and wicker shields were no match for the wall of bronze. The pass was choked with bodies. The Persian dead piled so high they formed a new wall, which the Greeks used for defense. For 48 hours, the tiny Greek coalition held back the largest army on earth. Xerxes, it is said, leaped from his throne in terror 3 times as he watched his best troops get systematically dismantled. He was learning the brutal truth. In this narrow pass, his numbers were not an advantage, they were a liability.
My king, the Persians have found the secret path, the Anopeia. Ephialtes has betrayed us. They are coming up behind us now.
The battle would not be won by force. It would be undone by geography and by a name that has lived in infamy for 2.5 millennia, Ephialtes. He was not a deformed monster, as myth would have it. He was a local man from Malis who, in exchange for a rich reward, went to Xerxes and told him of a secret, a goat path, the Anopeia path, which wound up through the mountains and came down behind the Greek position. Leonidas knew about this path. He had stationed the 1,000 Phocians there to guard it. But in the pre-dawn mist, when the Phocians heard the rustle of leaves, the sound of 10,000 Persian immortals scaling the ridge, they panicked. They thought the main attack was on them, and they retreated to a higher position to make a stand. In doing so, they left the path, unguarded. Scouts ran to Leonidas. The news was a death sentence. The Persians were at his back. A council of war was held. This is the most crucial and most misunderstood moment of the battle. Leonidas didn't order all the other Greeks to flee. He sent most of them away. The alliance was fragile. He needed the Athenian fleet to stay engaged. He needed the other armies to live and fight another day. His mission was never to win at Thermopylae. It was to die at Thermopylae. It was to hold the pass, inflict maximum damage, and create a propaganda victory so powerful it would galvanize Greece. An oracle had even told the Spartans that to save their city, a king must die. Leonidas was a politician and a king. He understood sacrifice and strategy. This was his move. But here is the final, brutal, and often forgotten truth. 2 groups did not leave. The 400 Thebans he kept as hostages, as he didn't trust them. But 700 men from the city of Thespiae chose to stay. They were not Spartans. They had no Agoge. They were farmers and craftsmen, and they had no sons to carry on their names. They simply looked at the 300 Spartans, at their king, and chose to die with them, for the simple, profound idea that their homes, their families, were worth dying for.
Hold the line! Fight until the last breath! Push them back! Do not yield!
The end was not heroic in the clean, cinematic sense. It was desperate. The remaining 1,000 Greeks, Spartans, Thespians, and the cornered Thebans retreated to a small hill. They were surrounded, a tiny island in a sea of Persians. They fought for the one thing that mattered now, the body of their king. Leonidas had fallen. The fight over his corpse was a storm of primal rage. Spears were broken. They drew their short swords, the xiphos. When those broke, they fought with their hands and their teeth. Xerxes, wanting no more of his men to die in the grinder, called back his infantry. He brought forward his archers. The Greek historian Dianekes had joked on the first day that if the Persians blotted out the sun with their arrows, we will fight in the shade. Now the sky went black. The arrows rained down, a final lethal storm. And the last of the defenders, the 300 Spartans and the 700 Thespians, died to a man. After the battle, a furious Xerxes found the body of Leonidas. In an act of pure sacrilege, he had the king's head cut off and his body crucified. The war was not over. The Persians marched south and they burned and evacuated Athens to the ground. Tactically, Thermopylae was a catastrophic total defeat.
Molon labe! To victory for Sparta!
So, why do we remember it? Why a glorious defeat and not the actual victories? Because Leonidas's gambit worked. The brutal truth is that Thermopylae was not a military victory. It was a propaganda masterpiece. The story of the sacrifice electrified Greece. It proved the invincible Persian could be held. It proved he could bleed. It bought the Athenian navy, led by the brilliant Themistocles, just enough time to prepare. A few weeks later, in the Straits of Salamis, that navy, using the same choke point logic, utterly destroyed the Persian fleet. Xerxes, his supply line cut, fled back to Asia. The next year, at Plataea, a united Greek army, led by Spartans, finally crushed the Persian land forces and ended the invasion for good. Thermopylae was the spark. It was the story that held the alliance together. The 300 and the 700 Thespians we so often forget were transformed from men into symbols. A monument was raised on the hill where they fell, and its inscription, by the poet Simonides, remains one of the most famous in history. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. The brutal truth of Thermopylae is that the battle was won by a lie. The lie that it was only 300. The lie that they fought for freedom as we know it. The lie that the Persians were monsters. The reality is a far better story. It's a story of a complex, sophisticated Persian Empire and a brutal, slaving Spartan society. It's a story of 7,000 men, not 300. It's a story of 700 farmers from Thespiae who found a courage equal to any Spartan. And it's a story of a politically brilliant king who knew that how you die can be more powerful than how you fight. We are drawn to the myth, but it is the truth, complex, bloody, and all too human, that truly holds the power. The battle for Thermopylae was lost in 480 BC, the battle for its memory. That battle continues, even today. We began this journey by tearing down a comfortable myth. We looked past the gleaming bronze and the scarlet capes to find the brutal, complicated truth. We didn't find demigods. We found a society built on oppression, fighting for its own survival. We found a king who was a master of propaganda, who understood that a beautiful death could be the most powerful weapon in his arsenal. We found a Persian Empire that was not a horde of monsters, but a sophisticated global civilization. And, most importantly, we found the 700 Thespians, the forgotten farmers and citizens who stood shoulder to shoulder with the Spartans, whose sacrifice has been buried by the very legend they helped to create. The brutal truth of Thermopylae is not that 300 men held off 1,000,000. The brutal truth is that history is never simple. It's not a clean line between good and evil, freedom and tyranny. It is a story of flawed human beings, brutal systems, and impossible choices. The Spartans were not fighting for our modern idea of freedom, but they were willing to die for theirs. The legacy of the Hot Gates is not, in the end, a story about a battle. It's a story about a story. It teaches us that how we remember an event, how we package it, and who we choose to make its heroes can be more powerful than any army. The physical battle was lost, but the battle for the narrative, that was Leonidas's ultimate and everlasting victory. Thank you for joining us for this dive into the brutally true history of Thermopylae. If you believe the truth is always more interesting than the myth, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more historical deep dives. But the discussion doesn't end here. We want to know what you think. Head down to the comments and answer this question. Who do you find more heroic, the 300 Spartans who were trained from birth to die in battle, or the 700 Thespians who chose to stay and die with them? Let's discuss it. And if you want to know what happened next, how the Greeks pulled victory from the jaws of this defeat, click the video on your screen to watch our next documentary, Themistocles, the naval genius who trapped and destroyed the Persian fleet at Salamis. Until next time, keep digging for the truth.